Hello and welcome to the Geoeconomics Podcast by Adrianople Group. My name is Kai Yesh. I am a research associate at Adrianople Group, and today I have the pleasure of talking to Mr. Samir Mallya, the manager of the Geopolitical Intelligence and Analysis Division at Grid91, an Indian risk consulting startup. It's a pleasure to have you, Mr. Mallya.
Thank you, Mr. Jess. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast.
Thank you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the company you work for first? What is Grid91? What is it that you do, and what kind of services do you offer?
Okay, so Grid91 is basically a India-based risk consulting startup. We have started our businesses in July 2016, and we're based out of Mumbai. And some of the projects that the services that we offer are risk consulting, security risk consulting, which is basically to do with audits for a host of hospitality industries and infrastructure development companies. Secondly, one of our major service that we offer, a flagship project that we have, is Geopolitical Intelligence and Analytics, which is like the division which I manage for the organization. The role of this division is basically to provide bespoke reports to our clients, which not only help them prepare for certain contingencies, but also cater to some of the risks that may have an impact on their operations as well as their reputations. So that remains like the geopolitical intelligence and analysis remains our flagship service. Apart from this, we also do a lot of travel risk management for our clients in order to ensure their business continuity is not hampered. It also involves basically country risk assessment, site risk assessment, and even city risk analysis, which are very client specific in nature. Apart from that, we also take care of crisis management, which is like an ad hoc services which a client may be facing. So the latest example for crisis management was when our operations team was on ground for Sri Lanka when the terrorist attacks happened. So we were very instrumental for our clients in facilitating an exfil from the country, and we have done it really well. Apart from that, the other services that we offer is training and development for the security teams, depending on their requirements, and also do the gap assessments in the capabilities. When it comes to our clientele, like we cater to a whole lot of clients from multiple industries. So we have clients from banking and insurance, oil and gas, real estate, construction, and we also cater to a very specific product for the local law enforcement agencies, which is called as a terror tracker. So terror tracker is an analysis of trends in terrorism. We do limited deep and dark web scanning, and based on that we make very bespoke and client specific reports, which are not only for the corporates but also for the security and intelligence agencies. So this adds an additional value to the existing body of knowledge as well as investigations that our law enforcement agencies carry. So terror tracker and geopolitical intelligence and analysis, these are two of our flagship projects that Grid91 offers.
Thank you very much for that explanation, Mr. Mallya. And what would you say are the limitations or the peculiarities of performing such a business in a country like India or in the broader region that is still very much developing? Are there any specific trends that you have to keep up with, or is the business environment and legal environment significantly different from a developed country?
Yeah, so I have broadly classified the challenges that I would say, rather than problems, the challenges that risk consulting firms operating in India face. So before I even delve into these three, there is like one disclaimer that I would like to give. Like the industry is at a very nascent stage of development. So it is only after 2005 to 2010 period. After that is what we have been oriented to this field in India. There have been certain risk consulting firms which have been operating even before that. But when it comes to like an actual business in itself, so that is a period after 2005, 2010, that sector. So the problems or the challenges that risk consultancies face, I've broadly classified them into three. First is like the personal and the human resource. Secondly, it's the operational issues, and third is the financial issues that typically the clients on the operatives on the vendor side face while operating in India. Firstly, well, I would like to ponder upon the human resource bit of it. As I said, it is at a very nascent stage that this industry is when it comes to India. So there is this disconnect between the requirements of the market as well as the manpower that we are getting in it. So it is only now that certain universities and private colleges are taking up this as an alternative means of employment, and that is where they're designing their training modules, their syllabus, to cater to the requirements of the industry. So to plug this gap between what the universities have and the educational institutes have to offer and what the industry requires, Grid 91 is also part of certain initiatives which help the students understand what are the requirements of the job, what are the level of expertise that they need to build up before even the onboarding starts, what are the challenges, what are the benefits, and what exactly does the job require. So this is one of the initiatives that we have. Apart from that, the industry, as I mentioned, the skill sets that are required, at least when it comes to our country, it's like very niche. uh, Secondly, as I'll be pondering more on the financial bit, but let me give you a heads up on this. It continues to be a relatively not so sophisticated tech market. So when it comes to introduction of advanced technologies for scanning, for risk mitigation, for risk identification as well, I would rate India slightly lower than what the currently the market is in the West. There are a lot of operational and economic issues to it, which I'll be focusing on or rather mentioning in the subsequent section. Secondly, the operational issues. So now the industry is requiring for more bespoke reports, very customized solutions to the industry. The previous phase of like the past decade has been morely on generic reports, but over a period of time, the CSOs who are receiving the reports or the alerts, or even the management which is receiving these reports, they're not really satisfied with the quality of the reports. That's because they have been generic in nature. So now there is an increasing demand from the client side for a very customized solution which is very specific to them. This specification is not only industry wise but also geographically. So for example, if a organization has a business set up in Gujarat, which is a neighboring state of Maharashtra, and if there is something happening in Maharashtra, the client will be not interested until unless it has a major impact on their operations or their businesses. They would rather prefer to get more feeds and more inputs from any event that is happening in Gujarat. So this is like a requirement where we see a gap in between the client's requirement and what we can provide. Secondly, the diversity of requirements. As we have more clients, every client has their own specific set of requirements. That makes it difficult to cope with a lot of demands of different clients at any given particular point of time. Most of these are time sensitive requirements, and managing all of them together, especially for the vendor side, with again a less trained manpower, becomes slightly an issue. Though there have been a dedicated training program which every risk consultancy now undertakes before the analyst is brought on board, which to a certain degree has helped plug this gap. The third is there's a disconnect between what the industry requires and what is being provided by the client side, by the vendor side. The client fails to get the problem at hand to mention what exactly the crisply as clearly as possible the problems that is at hand and which needs addressal or which needs a solution. So there seems to be some disconnect between the communication as well, but again, as I said, there have been certain mechanisms which have developed over time which helps plug this gap. Thirdly, the Indian market, especially all those Indian firms having operations in India, they are not as risk aversive to the operations that are in India as compared to foreign companies in operating in India. So we are more used to like protests or the nature of protest or service disruptions, and so the need for the very basic need to have a risk consulting team to or a risk consulting vendor uh, when it comes to an Indian corporate working in India, it's not there. So most of the businesses that are operating in India, which are not Indian entities, are the ones who sign up for geopolitical intelligence or any other crisis management systems. They are more open to recommendations by them as compared to Indian major corporates. But now you have organizations like Reliance, which is like an Indian multinational giant, who have understood the significance and the importance of these preemptive nature of alerts and everything, and they have themselves invested in the technology which can help them gain an understanding of what are the risks, what are the threats. They are not only now being on the service side but also on the vendor side of the market, and this is a very promising prospect when it comes to the industry at large. We can now expect more refined means of when you can say methodologies and even technology for that matter to be introduced into the Indian market, which was to a degree lacking till this time. The next is the diversified nature of risks. So let me give you an example. For example, in the US, say there are like relatively lax gun control rules, and the situation of an active shooter may be more prevalent. But in India, it is not the case. In India, it is more of socio-political unrest as opposed to outright threat of terror. Yeah, we had issues of terrorism, we continue to have them, but they are now more or less localized into the militancy hotspots of, say, the northern state of Jammu and Kashmir, and to an extent in the northeast. But to the rest of India, to the best of our knowledge, we have not seen any major security incident after, say, 2010. So then, though these threats are underlying, but they are not like a major concern when it comes to major CSOs. To one of the research projects that we had done, road accidents, road safety and safety for women were rated as more pressing an issue for a CSO than an act of terrorism. So this is like the diversity of the risks that we are talking of. It may not be your conventional risk, but these are like some of the unconventional risks, but having an impact on your operations, which a particular risk management team in a corporate or the service provider has to cater to when it comes to giving them briefings. Secondly, when it comes to the third challenge which I would like to focus on is the financial issues. The human resource and operational issues are one. The third is the financial issue that I would like to talk. Because of the nature of the threats, the CSOs and the security risk team that they have very limited budgets, and there is an increasing demand for justifying those budgets, even if they are limited. That makes it the CSO has a relatively lesser budget to be allocated to the vendor side, and this means at times even the vendor side can't invest in development or adoption of new technology. So that is the circle comes in, the complete circle forms in, wherein due to lack of budgets, the vendor side can't invest in major technologies, and because of that, we'll have to rely on more of manpower intensive techniques, and then the error of assessment increases. The probability of an error of an assessment really increases substantially. But again, as I mentioned, like with new players, like major players like Reliance coming in with even control risks, and international as well as the major companies, the global corporates coming into the fray, the likelihood of introduction of new technologies and absorption of that and its receptivity towards the existing issue, that has gone up significantly. So I see some really good prospects for the industry in the region, but at this stage, it is a game of patience. You have to be like very patient when it comes to operating in an Indian market, because the mindset is more of reactive than being proactive. And again, the diversity of issues which vary from not only state to state but like town to town and city to city. Any foreign application or technology being incorporated in India is a challenge in itself. You need customization in technology as well, which again is a very financial or a economic exercise, which given the current tight market is difficult to achieve.
Thank you very much for that very extensive answer, Mr. Mallya. You mentioned several times the risk of terrorism and even the case of the unfortunate attacks in Sri Lanka that you were involved with. Could you perhaps go more into how one mitigates the risk of terrorism and how you advise companies to react in the case of such unfortunate events?
Sure. So when it comes to a terror attack or an incident, the corporates by their mere resources won't be able to fend off. But what we can best do is at least avoid the or at least limit the impact of the potential fallout of a terrorist attack. That is where adoption of best practices, training into contingency measures, having elaborate contingency plans which get tested time and again against the prevailing threats, understanding what the threat is, how is it evolving, is what is required. And this is where our training module, the training vertical of Grid91 also helps, which not only trains and employees of particular corporates in handling issues like crisis events like the flooding or fire safety or anything, but also how to respond in case of a terrorist attack. So the mitigation measures and preparing for them, like to minimize the risks, is what we can do. Secondly, as major corporates have been operating in certain locales, getting a threat assessment on a regular basis, liaising with the local law enforcement agencies to get preemptive assessments is something that has helped. This methodology has actually worked really well when it comes to the latest security alert sounded in the Kandla port near Gujarat, where there were credible intelligence inputs indicating of a potential militant activity along the India-Pakistan border in the Sir Creek, which is like northern Gujarat. The response mechanism to that, where the all the port authorities had disseminated the threat, the advisory that was issued by the government agencies, right down to a single level, like the ship operator, that had been phenomenal. The reaction time has been phenomenally good. And this is what is one of the classic case studies of what corporations can do when it comes to an incident like an unfortunate incident like a terrorist attack.
Thank you. You mentioned the Gujarat incident. This sort of follows neatly into my next question. India has a fair number of special economic zones of varying levels of success and size. Have you done any consulting work for special economic zones in the past? What are the security risks facing special economic zones in India today? And what measures can they undertake to minimize those security risks?
Certainly, we had done a few site risk assessments and city risk assessment for some of our clients when it comes to the SEZs. So as you rightly mentioned, the success rates and the success story for SEZs in India has been at best classified as mixed. And there is no overarching security threat that can be applicable to all SEZs in India. Yes, as mentioned, in case of Gujarat, there was an imminent alert or a threat of an imminent potential attack by terrorist groups along the India-Pakistan border in the state of Gujarat. But a closer review of our spread of our SEZs in India, we will see most of them lie in the southern states. So Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Karnataka, they have a maximum number of SEZs, and each state has its own unique set of security issues that the state faces. If I want to like club all of them into one, some of the issues that typically organizations either operating in or willing or planning to operate in an SEZ is revolves around a few specific issues, but they are not only limited to terrorism or security issues. So it has more to do with the procedural aspect, the regulatory aspects, and even the fiscal aspects. So one of the major issues that we have seen in most of the cases of SEZs has been the cumbersome land acquisition process. So not only does an organization face issues when it comes to dealing with land issues, a lot of socio-political issues which ultimately culminate into protests, violence, and service disruption have come to the fore. The best case for this has been the Nandigram violence that we had seen in the state of West Bengal in 2007. And then there have been a series of other protests which are linked to land acquisition in SEZs. Secondly, even getting environmental clearances, issues of supply of water and the disruptions thereof in the nearing states, in the nearing cities, in case an SEZ is set up. Those are some of the other issues that typically have relatively poor redressal mechanisms. But then the government has been regularly amending the laws which makes the SEZ a win-win situation for both the landowners as well as the corporates which are willing to or which are intending to operate in them. So if you see, there have been multiple amendments even now, and the government has been working very closely with all the industrial majors to get into an understanding of what are the challenges and how best they can be solved. So again, see, when it comes to SEZ, it's like a work in progress for both the government as well as the corporations.
Would you say that the increased security risks present in India compared to other countries that employ SEZ programs, or at least some countries that employ SEZ programs, has been something that would deter investors? And do you see the role of Grid91 as providing the kind of intelligence and risk mitigation services that could potentially help attract more investors into India's special economic zones?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, investors are wary about the security situations, but when I say it's a security issue, it need not manifest into an act of terror, but something related to politico-social violence. That is where Grid 91 actually comes into picture. It's like a multiple level intervention that we typically engage with the permission of the clients. Firstly, it is not only about preempting which are the groups or what are the potential issues that a particular organization may face when going into an SEZ. We also help in gathering a lot of human intelligence into who are the potential disruptors. Are there any local antisocial elements or groups which may threaten the operations? So identifying these groups, having a liaison with the local law enforcement agencies, mitigating the risk, and addressing the demands if they are legitimate, so that there are no disruptions to services, is some of the issues that we face. One of our clients who was operating in the state of Gujarat, which is also known to be one of the most investor friendly investor friendly state in the country, had issues of local mafia having disruptions to their businesses. It is only through effective liaising with the local law enforcement agencies as well as addressing the community issues that were arising out of the business of the client, were we able to reach a win-win situation between the local disruptors as well as the organization. It's certainly a cumbersome process, it is a time taking process. So as I mentioned, operating in India requires a lot of patience, but once you get it right, it's a very economically lucrative sort of a deal that you can expect, but it comes with a lot of patience. Secondly, you have to understand the Indian mindset, which many of the corporates typically fail. It is never about the money, but then a lot of things are relationship driven. So if you are able to convince your uh, host or the op- an individual or a organization or a group which is trying to disrupt your business, the if you are able to show them the benefits of setting up a particular operation in that region, and if they are convinced with it, trust me, they are going to be like the most valuable assets that you have when it comes to ensuring business continuity. And this is what Grid 91 does in order to assist, in order to orient a particular organization with what are the risks and what can be done to mitigate them.
Thank you. You also mentioned that the field of business intelligence and risk consulting is fairly nascent in India. Would you say that it is in many ways still dominated by actors who have previously come out of the police and military industries? Do you see yourselves competing with or cooperating with entities that mostly employ previously public servants or military men?
Yes, if you see currently the organization, when the post of a CSO in all the major corporates, it has primarily been from the defense services as well as the law enforcement agencies. So it is like, I won't say it is mandatory, but it is advantageous to have someone from the services background or from the law enforcement agencies on your panel of management, or at least in their team. So that is what Grid91 has been doing through their ventures like the Terror Tracker. We develop effective linkages with the local law enforcement agencies, as well as those who have retired from the services, so that they have like a very good understanding of how the social and local dynamics are, how law enforcement agencies typically deal with it. So we adopt certain best practices from the existing network of of security professionals, and we adapt them and give them a corporate flavor and deal with certain contingencies, not only in the crisis management vertical, but also on ensuring the business continuity vertical, including our geopolitical reports as well as security risk consulting.
So you would say that the benefit of cooperating with people previously employed by the police and military is not simply the experience and the skills they bring to the table, but also their involvement in the relationships that previously exist. As you mentioned earlier, India is a heavily relationship-based society.
Yeah, that's correct. Secondly, again, relying only on open source intelligence has its own sets of like challenges. So many a times, employing these professionals, you can also get, again, it's not a thing that happens every time, but on many occasions, you may get certain vital leads, which we call human intelligence. That, even if it is corroborated by by OSINT, it forms a very robust risk report, which we typically share with our clients. That is what they value more as compared to your mere social media analysis.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Mallya. I feel that this interview has been very informative for both us and our listeners on the security risks facing Indian companies today. If there is anything more you would like to add, you are free to do so. Otherwise, I thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that's it. I don't have anything else to add.
In that case, I thank you very much for your time. I thank our listeners for their time, and I'm looking forward to seeing them hopefully on the next iteration of the Geoeconomics Podcast by Adrianople Group. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Mallya.
Thank you so much, Jess.